and welcome to Office Hours, the podcast where we answer the business questions you're too afraid to ask. I'm Cari Street, a student and member of staff here at King's College London, and in each episode I sit down with experts to break down some complex concepts in a simple and relevant way. Today I'm joined by Professor Sally Everett, the Vice Dean of Education here at King's Business School. She's the head of iLead and has written and researched extensively on diversity in business education. I'm also joined by Rita Kakati-Shah, an award-winning entrepreneur, author, diversity inclusion strategist, and a King's alum. Together, we're tackling a question that has been making the rounds among students and on social media, which is why does the business school, and why do business schools in general, give you the ick? Business students often have a reputation that can put people off, but is that fair and a valid reputation to have? And more importantly, for students from diverse backgrounds, how can we make business education and careers feel more accessible and inclusive? My office hour appointment is booked, so let's dive in. Sally and Rita, welcome to Office Hours. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks, Cari.
So the inspiration for today's episode comes from a student article which was on the KCL tab, and we'll link to that below, which was things about Kings that give you the ick. Now, if you've not heard this term, the ick is very much a Gen Z slang term, and it's something that gives you that slightly uneasy feeling. It might be a sudden thing that you get in relationships, but now it's been used to describe anything and everything. The number one thing in this article was the King's Business School. We want to talk about today where this reputation, where this ick might come from. I think one of the reasons for that is this stereotype, this stereotypical image of a business student that we might have. And that image that you might have in your head is probably someone white. It's potentially a man. It might be someone able-bodied, straight, and quite privileged, wealthy, coming from maybe an independent private school background. This is the image that students might have, but from your experience, and I'll go to you first with this one, Sally, is this a fair representation of the business school? And why do you think this is the reputation that perhaps the business school has?
Yeah, I was really surprised actually that the KBS had this ick, because that doesn't reflect my experience at all of King's Business School. In answer to your question, I think all business schools have had a reputational brand challenge in terms of that view that it is white men, it's European, American only cases that we use, it's voices just from those countries and those regions at the expense of diverse voices. I have to say, actually, King's Business School has committed both in its resources and its staff and its teaching to try and address that, and actually, to change that reputation that business schools have. And I'm really proud that it is doing that. We have over 70 nationalities from our student population, and there's about 50 different nationalities of staff population. I've been really proud that we're unusual in the fact that actually the majority of our students are women. So it's about 55% female, 45% men. And that's unusual, and particularly on the finance programs. And I have to say, in terms of where the reputation of business schools come from, it's like, as finance programs, people just want to make money at all costs. And actually that is completely the opposite to what I've seen in terms of the commitment and the passion of our students and of our staff. So I'm happy to say something a little bit more about that later on, but that doesn't resonate with King's Business School and this kind of sense of it, certainly with me in the 6 years I've been here.
Well, it's definitely good to hear that is maybe an unfair reputation that is out there. I know that, Rita, you're an alum of King's and graduated sort of in the early 2000s. How is the image of the business school that Sally's just given different from when you were at the business school? Can you see those differences in the demographics?
So I graduated in 2001. So as you've very diplomatically put, in the early 2000s, I love that. I think there is a difference when you think of the word perception versus reality. When I was studying, we had folks from all over the world. I was actually one of the dual honours students. So I had the benefit of sort of, crossing over and going to different campuses, reading the article. I definitely see the perception of why, because it's something that isn't just a King's business school thing. I hear this everywhere, and not just even in the UK, here in the States where I am now, and also with the work that my current company does with India. There is a big perception that business is only for folks that come from middle or an upper class background. So as an alum, I can tell you I'm none of the above, and entrepreneur myself now. And I think how I think things change from the early 2000s to now is the fact that we have the Entrepreneurship Institute, part of King's Business School. We have the Center for Sustainable Business, part of the business school. And that is just a reflection of what business school is all about. It's about changing the world. It's about creating an impact to make the world a better place.
Maybe building off that then, Sally, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the current things that we have at King's for prospective students that might be listening, that might have this image in their head of that finance bro stereotype of business schools, sort of what King's has on offer that maybe challenges those representations?
Absolutely. I mean, Rita said she's none of the above. I'm none of the above either, and a woman, I don't know how I've ended up in a business school actually sometimes, because I certainly didn't do my first degree in a business school, but I found a home here. And I just wanted to add to Rita, because she talked about the Center for Sustainable Business, talked about the Entrepreneurship Institute, but we've also got the Global Institute for Women's Leadership, which is in King's Business School, headed up and chaired by former Prime Minister of Australia, Julia Gillard. We're really proud that they are doing research about gender pay gap. They're doing a huge amount of work on looking at how we can actually create that diversity in the boardroom, in organisations, and society in general. As Vice Dean, I work very, very closely with our students, and I have a student group of advisors that we call the KBS 20. So these are students from all over the world, and I challenge them to develop projects, programs, initiatives, and things they want to see happen in the business school. And one of the pillars of that is innovation. And I said to students, you can do anything in innovation. It's up to you, and I'll support that. They came back to me and said, we want to go into schools that have socially challenging areas, that are economically disadvantaged, and we want to promote and champion business education. We want to go in there as mentors. We want to go in there as leaders. We want to talk to students that perhaps even haven't thought about a business education. Can I tell you how proud I am of those students that have now gone into schools with a huge amount of information? We call it now the I give. I'm now expecting and hoping those students, hopefully many of them may be listening to this podcast, will think actually business education is for me. Cari, just to mention, you mentioned I need the Centre for Innovation, Leadership, Education and Development, named by students. Part of its ethos is really to, I suppose, challenge what we're talking about now. And there are so many different projects that we are focused on, but they all have to have students at the heart and have a kind of social justice, diversity, inclusion, purpose. Otherwise, we're not interested, actually. And I Give is one of them. But the other, which I literally was running and supporting yesterday, is what we call impactathons. And that is where students are working with corporates, and the corporates have their service days where members of staff can give back, and actually working with charities. And yesterday we were working with the Bay Tree charity, which is a women's empowerment charity in South London. How students can help them with their mentoring programs, with their branding, with their fundraising. I am so proud of what our students are doing, and I'm proud of the way that our academics are facilitating and cultivating that innovation, but it's diversity innovation.
I think that'll be so inspiring, especially for prospective students who might be debating whether to apply for business schools. If you have that image, there's so many opportunities, especially here at King's. Obviously, we've got to represent the uni we're at. I was just wondering, for you, Rita, obviously you work and you've made your career as a diversity and inclusion strategist and consultant for students that are thinking, they're really passionate about this area and actually they want to take it further than just being part of, things at university. Maybe they want to develop a career out of this. Firstly, what do you do? How would you define your work on a day-to-day basis? And how did you sort of forge your pathway into that area?
Great question. And I will try to summarize it as succinctly as I can. So myself, I started my career in finance. I went into investment banking in London, where I was for about 10 years. I started off on a trading floor in the pan-European sales trading desk. So it was a very intense, very testosterone-heavy environment. So that, in a way, does fill a little bit of the perception over there that folks are talking about. But I made it my own. I always had a passion to be curious and do my best. So I did that for about 10 years and I absolutely loved it. From day one, I was asking questions. So I remember from day one, I remember thinking, gosh, I know there are definitely women at the firm. Where are they? They're not on the trading floor. So help set up the women's network. When you have a question, when you find there is something that is not there, create it and go and network internally and find the resources to be able to do that. I did that. After a decade, I was asked to put together a team for global business development in the pharmaceutical industry. Ironically, the former head of the Institute of Psychiatry and Neurology at King's approached me and said, look, I'm setting up something with clinical trials and drug development in the States. Rita, you've been at King's for a bit. Can you help me? I got my feet wet that way. It was something very new. I'd been in the corporate world for so long. I certainly was an environment where all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed all the time, to now seeing the completely opposite end of the spectrum where none of that existed. So I love doing that and I love to travel. So that's why, really fit like a glove almost doing that. Those travels is what brought me to New York, which is where I now am. And settled here, got married, settled here, and I've got 2 kids now. And when the kids were very, very young, I remember taking some time off to raise them. And at that point, I completely was blown away by my new life course. I took my own mum for granted until I became one. And it very much was a career transition for me. A lot of people plan this out, call this a career break. I call it a career transition because at no point was I taking a break. I was very much working. It was a 24/7 job. It's the Saturday morning I want to have a line. No, it doesn't work that way. So it was definitely something I completely embraced and I wanted to do my best at. I'd always been in the workforce. I'd want to give my best and do my best for this new job of mine. That's how I saw it. And when I was doing that, and after the kids were a little bit older and I was ready to explore going back into a paid job, I was really surprised at the responses I was getting from even friends of mine that I'd stayed in touch with in the industry. There was certainly a big perception that because I had taken the time to raise my kids, I was not ambitious anymore. It would be further from the truth to say that I was absolutely out there, but the perception was that I wasn't. That planted the seed for me starting my own company, Uma, really from a passion and almost an anger. I think you could call it, for lack of a better word, say that is not true. That's not what it is. I want to change this perception. Perception and reality are 2 different things. And that's why I started the company, to change that perception, to redefine the new reality. It's an ongoing process, but we've, 8.5 years later now, we're working with corporate, we're working with policy forums, we're working with academic institutions here in the States and in different parts of the world as well, to really redefine that, change that perception, redefine reality.
Thank you for sharing all that. That's so interesting. I'm sure that for students that, are maybe in a what do I do next kind of mentality, just showing all the different pathways and ways of getting into the business world and diversity. And if you have that passion, which I'm sure a lot of students, King's students and everyone who's been from a diverse background does, then as you show, it can motivate you forwards. I was just wondering, because obviously there are still lots of things that need to change within business schools and outside within, the industries that you work with and consult with in diversity. If I could give both of you a magic wand, and with your magic wand, you suddenly have the power to immediately change something, be that a policy, a way of doing something within business education, a demographic, whatever it is, what would your first thing be that you wanted to change?
Education unlocks so many opportunities. If I had a magic wand, and I know it's not possible, but I'd make education free for everybody and therefore accessible. And I know that obviously as university, you need to pay our way, but a different funding model that will open up opportunities for those that, that are disadvantaged, that are thinking, oh my goodness, I'm not going to be able to pay the fees, I'm not going to pay the loan back, whatever. Just takes that shackle away and actually just want to go to university because it's something you're passionate about and not have to worry that I'm going to have to earn X amount or Y amount, do this because it's meaningful to me. And to be able to just unleash that skill and that vision and that kind of innovation that students have without being tied down by that financial burden, I think is one of many things I'd like on my wish list. But you asked for one, and that's probably going to be that.
That would change so much for me. So I'd love that one. I'm doing all the scholarship for postgraduate applications now. And I tell you, if I had that wand, that's what I'd be wishing away as well. Rita, pass over to you. What would your magic wand do?
If there's only one magic wish, I would probably scrap the traditional classroom style of lecturing, which I know we have actually, and are starting to speak of that actually at King's as well. But scrapping that traditional form of education, making it more case study and real life based. So we're out in society, where you're actually looking at real problems. When you have speakers that come in that are more junior than the senior partners that usually come in and give talk, because that's more real life, where you learn about what happens when someone tells you no, what happens if you just don't get any recognition. But being in the workforce, that is something I hear still to this very day, even with the swish and the change of generations, that, gosh, these students aren't ready for the real world. So how can you get them ready? Get them to experience real life sooner. And you can do that in an academic format. Just switch it up a little bit.
I think let's move into our No Silly Questions section now. These are questions that we've had students submit to us via our Instagram stories about anything that's on their mind in terms of diversity in business education. The first question we had is, I feel so tired of traditional assessments like exams and essays. Do you think that in the future, business schools will change how students are assessed?
Absolutely. There were two things I said when I joined King's Business School. So I would remove exams was number one, and I'd remove lectures was number two. People were horrified by that. However, the pandemic showed us that it was possible, where people said, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that. Actually, we did it, and it was possible. So in terms of assessments, we have really committed to a diversity of assessment, because exams is the least inclusive assessment method going. And I am absolutely not a fan. And what I have seen are colleagues embracing exactly what Rita was saying, real life client briefs. So we have social enterprises, charities, organizations, small, medium enterprises that are going, I've got this marketing challenge, I've got this strategy challenge, and I'd like to give it to the students. So actually the students now are writing consultancy reports. They're doing presentations, they're doing posters, and actually the diversity of assessment allows us to really nurture a more inclusive educational environment and really showcase the skills that all our students have, rather than the ability just to remember a couple of facts or mathematical equations or whatever it might be and go forward. The one pushback and the concern has been generative AI. Oh, but the students can just now put everything into generative AI. So where our assessment is, how can we make it really authentic, really person-centered, that is not just, oh, I'm just going to put something into Gen AI and create the outcome, because that's poor assessment design. What we can do is actually have debates and conversations and group work and things that actually happen in the boardroom. Exactly what Rita was saying, that you cannot just quickly, oh, the boss asked you a question, I'm going to just quickly Gen AI out. You've got to think on your feet. You've got to feel confident. You've got to have that kind of ability to synthesize information. And that's what we're trying to replicate in our assessment design.
I'm sure there's a lot of students jumping for joy out there now hearing you say that, Sally. Prospective students that maybe are doing your A-levels and you're ready for a bit of a change and some real world experience. So I think that's great to hear and hopefully reassuring for people. The next question we had, a slightly different one here, is, I feel like I'm constantly code switching to fit in at uni and with my hometown friends. It's exhausting. Do you have any advice on how to feel like you're being yourself professionally and personally without needing to constantly change? So a big question, and maybe the first thing would be helpful to just define code switching as a term.
Absolutely. I mean, the identity that you present in different kind of groups in which you are engaged with, whether it be social groups or educational peer group. And I can absolutely relate to that sense of exhaustion in terms of, hang on a second, I've got to use slightly different language with this group and I've got to have this particular kind of hat on. now with this group and and then kind of my family group, I've got to have this kind of language. And I relate to it. I was first in family to a university. So my parents left school 14, 15, 16. And they laugh at me because I come back, yes, I'm a professor at King's Business School and King's College London. But I go back home and my dad says, I don't understand the language that you're using. And so I then have to kind of code switch and change, I suppose, who I am. And what I've learned probably later in life than I should have done is that be yourself and be authentic. And increasingly, I think it's important in businesses and actually all organizations for others to kind of go, oh, actually, this person is like me. And we don't have to pretend to be something that we are not. So it is difficult, particularly if your social and your educational environments and groups are very, very different. But actually, I think people will respect you and love you for who you are. And I've certainly seen that. And I think just being able to share your experiences and what you're doing in whatever world you're currently existing, I think people already appreciate that. I'm sure Rita will have a take on this too.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with everything you've said, Sally. The only thing I'd add is that this is where I think having a mentor can really, really help as well, because then you have somebody else who went to King's but isn't there right now. So they're not kind of in the faculty thing. So it's not, can I go and talk to my professor? They're not quite somebody that's on your peer group level, but it's someone who's had a career that can give you advice for yourself. And they're just there to be an extension of a friend and sounding board for you. Someone from my own background as well, coming from a Northeast Indian background, I certainly felt growing up in a very white middle-class background in the UK that I was constantly somebody different at school and at home, so much so that I didn't even see it. It was just something you'd switch in and out. And when I actually came to university, when I was at King's, I was really surprised for the first time how many more kind of Indians there were, folks from Northeast India, just different demographic backgrounds. And I felt more at ease. So we didn't have the mentoring program back in my day, back in the early 2000s, but certainly now, I think having a mentor can really help. So if there's an opportunity to sign up for one or just ask how to get on that mentorship program, I would tell students, please do. But also there are so many clubs these days that are part of the student union and whatnot that students can look at. If it's a certain community club, if it's an interest, a hobby that you have, there's so many clubs. If there is a club or something you're interested in that doesn't exist, set it up. You can always do that as well. So these are ways that you can bring who you are to your education every day. And then you'll be surprised how many friends you're going to have, and other folks will be like, oh my gosh, me too. Or, I can't believe you set that up. I'd love to join if you'd have me. And that's how it starts. Sometimes you think you're the one only. And then if you put yourself out there and start opening up and being honest and say that, you know what, I just feel uncomfortable speaking like this, or having that written form versus the spoken form and having to constantly switch is the challenge. If you say that, people will kind of resonate a bit more to that messaging as well.
We'll have a final no silly question before we move on. This one says, I am a white male business school student. How can I be part of helping to diversify business school, or am I just part of the problem?
The very fact you have asked that question indicates to me you are not part of the problem, you are part of the solution. Actually, I have given many International Women's Day talks and I've set up many women's networks, and I've always said it needs to be gender inclusive and we need male allies in this space. I think men that are willing to raise their voices, to speak out when it's not right, when there are concerns and when there are issues, is equally as important as women and everyone actually raising the diversity, equity, inclusion banner, so to speak. We absolutely cannot take, I say we as women, the kind of burden on ourselves. I think that's just placing the burden on those who are already doing quite a lot of the emotional heavy lifting here. So I'd say, no, the very fact you're asking that questions, continue to ask those questions and be an ally to others.
Now we're going to move into our final section. This is our 2-minute takeaway section, which kind of puts Sally on the spot and asks you to talk for 2 minutes on pretty much anything that you feel passionate about. Basically, if listeners are going to take away something from this conversation, if you were trying to convey it in 2 minutes, what would be your pitch? They'll put 2 minutes on the clock. And if you're ready, off you go.
So I am going to talk about the importance of putting students at the heart of everything. And too often, lecturers, teachers, the university sector, policymakers have seen students as the kind of, okay, they're going to come into university but we're the ones that know best. I don't think that's the case at all. And that is what I've wanted to change. So I mentioned our Innovation Leadership Centre, and its tagline is reimagining business education. And that doesn't come lightly because, as we've been discussing, I think has had all these traditions and has had all this kind of baggage behind it. But what we've done is put students into the governance, empower students to say, what is it that can really change and reimagine business education for you? And by doing that, what I've seen are a number of different initiatives that have come through from their ideas. So that may well be a change in the teaching model. That may well be things like say my name, pronounce my name correctly campaign. These small things that make a difference. And what we are seeing is that students are leaning in and helping each other to create a sense of belonging for each other, to show that they actually matter to the whole university community in so many different ways. And actually what we're finding is we've got our second years, our third years who are mentoring first years, their peers, and actually being there for them to answer the questions perhaps that you might not want to ask the lecturer. Students are doing that, and they're becoming associates, doing advocacy, and they're doing kind of an ambassador role. And what that is doing is just allowing our students to shine in a way we hadn't got the infrastructure for in the past. So I don't know whether I've spoken for two minutes or not, but students at the centre of everything, and the rest follows naturally.
Thank you both so much for joining us today on Office Hours. This is a brand new podcast and we've got loads more coming out. So do keep listening if you've enjoyed this one. We're going to link below to all of the wonderful work that both Sally and Rita do, so you can have a look at that if you're interested. But the last thing to say is just thank you so much, Sally and Rita, for joining us and for giving your expertise. This is such an important area, and I think especially for prospective students of King's and other universities, it's really something that can be on their mind.
Thanks so much, Cari.
Absolute pleasure.
And thank you again, listeners. We'll see you again soon. Goodbye.